Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering woke panic as mega donors and investors reject diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from the Washington Post, how a liberal billionaire became America's leading anti-DEI crusader. From Forbes, billionaire Ken Griffin becomes latest to stop donations to Harvard, calls students whiny snowflakes. And from Fortune, Mark Cuban defends DEI as fellow billionaires Elon Musk, Bill Ackman attack diversity strategies. From the Washington Post, how a liberal billionaire became America's leading anti-DEI crusader. 3 years ago, Vivek Ramaswamy called up hedge fund manager Bill Ackman with an idea, an anti-woke asset management firm that would combat social justice and climate initiatives spreading throughout the business world. Though the billionaire power broker had made a career forcing management changes in businesses, Bill Ackman seemed an unlikely backer for his tennis buddies project. A longtime Democrat donor, Ackman had helped propel the career of Senator Cory Booker and his philanthropic efforts, including paying for thousands of undocumented immigrants to attend college. Moreover, Ackman had praised the movement Ramaswamy opposed, known as Environmental, Social, and Corporate Governance, or ESG, but the tumultuous years of the pandemic has shifted the Wall Street billionaire's worldview. Like others in his uber-wealthy circles, Ackman has come to believe that well-meaning ESG efforts had curdled into something pernicious, stifling debate, destroying careers, and undermining the meritocratic values that made the free market system, quote, the most powerful potential force for good in addressing society's long-term problems, as he once put it. Ackman invested $2.5 million in Ramaswamy's Strive Asset Management, an early flashpoint in his personal transformation. By last month, when the hedge fund manager led a successful campaign to oust Harvard University's first black president, he had fully emerged as one of the most powerful and unexpected adversaries of a diversity movement that has swept society since the 2020 death of George Floyd. In hours of interviews with the Washington Post, Ackman, who is Jewish, argued that campus responses to the October 7th attack had been lackluster compared with the solidarity shown post-George Floyd. To Ackman, the contrast exposed the hypocrisy of the movement for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, which includes race-based hiring goals and diversity trainings he called unhealthy and the root cause of anti-Semitism. Quote, "Say whatever you want about me being a powerful person," Ackman said. "I don't want to advantage my own group at the expense of another. What I want is fairness." A master of making public companies bend to his vision, Ackman is translating his Wall Street tactics to attack the ideology of DEI, which generally asserts that including underrepresented groups benefits companies. Ackman says those efforts have in practice become discriminatory and claims even Martin Luther King Jr. would have opposed them. He is creating a think tank which he describes as a cross between a research center for his curiosities and an incubator of solutions underpinned by a philosophy he defines as, quote, "Look, I don't like it when people get screwed." He said he will pursue his crusade against discrimination in all forms to the ends of the earth. He communicates with his 1.2 million followers on Twitter, a platform he rarely used before the pandemic, in 1,000+ word tweets written from his elliptical, Ubers, and his private jet. He wants everyone to know that his most popular recent Twitter post has 36 million views. Pretty effing huge, he says. How many subscribers does Washington Post have? Ackman's evolution mirrors many elites who, like the hedge fund manager, see themselves as moderates and not culture warriors. That group includes Elon Musk, who says he voted for Democrats, including Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and President Biden, but now surrounds himself with a right-wing cohort online and recently declared diversity, equity, and inclusion to be propaganda words. In a recent memo, venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, another billionaire, named his enemies as ESG, social responsibility, sustainability, socialism, and anti-greatness. And Lululemon founder Chip Wilson, another billionaire, in an interview last month said he didn't care for the woke diversity and inclusion thing, arguing that ads showing models with various body types can send the wrong message. Ackman has this weird resonance because people are like, he's basically right, even if no one in a real position of power will say it out loud, said Sam Lessin, a former Facebook executive who recently ran for a seat on Harvard's alumni board of overseers with support from Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg and opposes DEI. Quote, if you've experienced and understand what excellence really looks like, then you know that for America's future, we need excellence, he added. Investor Mark Cuban, a strong DEI supporter, argues that the investor class has become newly emboldened to attack the movement, in part because of Twitter. They are, quote, falling into the anti-woke echo chamber, he said. Twitter is the glue that unites them. Some DEI experts agree that certain diversity initiatives have had a chilling effect on public debate. There are many institutions where it is impossible to say certain things and the world is divided into oppressor and oppressed, said Ralph Richard Banks, director of the Center for Racial Justice at Stanford Law School. But Banks disagrees with critics like Ackman who think the solution is to eliminate the entire industry, arguing the outcome would be a grave setback to limited racial progress. Ackman is well-intentioned, but he can recreate the same us versus them dynamics that are the root of so many of these problems. Ackman waves off critics who dismiss him and like-minded titans as wealthy white men clinging to power. And he rejects the idea that anyone should judge him by his new right-wing bedfellows. He says that robust debate, even with people with whom he vehemently disagrees, is exactly what society is currently lacking, the very point of his crusade. If he has a megaphone, he argues, it's only because people want to hear what he has to say. This self-appointed Mr. Fix-It tendency became the hallmark of Ackman's career. In the mid-1990s, he took a large stake in the troubled real estate company that owned Rockefeller Center and grew frustrated with mismanagement. Quote, I watched the other board members make mistake after mistake after mistake, he said. Eventually, he brought on partners to buy the company outright. Quote, that was probably the first moment that I realized that as a shareholder, I could do this better than the guy running the company. As an activist investor, Ackman would later take a sizable position in companies, then force changes to make them more profitable. But once he decides what's right, he doesn't back down, said Keith Creel, whom Ackman recruited to lead Canadian Pacific Kansas City, a large railway operator. Though weary of corporate raiders, Creel grew to respect Ackman, who parachuted him from New York in 2012, unafraid to take on a lazy board of directors that Creel said was, quote, run like a country club. Even in the brash world of finance, these tactics have rubbed many the wrong way. Former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz once called Ackman despicable, accusing him of leaking company information to push out the CEO of JCPenney, a member of the Starbucks board. Longtime rival Carl Icahn, the activist hedge fund manager, called Ackman the most sanctimonious person he ever met. A rival investor said he'd rather hang out with drug dealers and prostitutes than Ackman. But Creel and other friends insist Ackman's campaign against DEI is free of cynicism or ulterior motive. Quote, he's a very principled person, Creel said. Quote, he's a guy who thinks that if the right thing isn't being done, he's going to do it whether it makes people uncomfortable or not. Paul Barrett, deputy director of the Stern Center for Business and Human Rights at New York University, attended Harvard with Ackman in the mid-1980s. While Ackman's singular determination makes sense in the cutthroat world of Wall Street, Barrett said, it is inappropriate when the target is the first black leader of the most prominent educational institution in America. Quote, when he's bullying a company like that, he's bought stock in. At least he owns a piece of that company, Barrett said. Quote, but when you go out into the broader world and start telling institutions that you don't have an ownership stake in how to behave properly, when you take on complex multidimensional issues like race in higher education, all you're really saying is, I'm a really rich guy. I've got access to communications technology, and I've got no shame. Until 2020, Ackman had just 30,000 followers on the platform and had tweeted fewer than 24 times. But that February, he became increasingly anxious about reports of a mysterious virus emerging from China. He discovered that the platform was full of scientists and epidemiologists sharing their views. Messaging with experts on the platform, he became convinced that the virus was about to surge. Ackman panicked, moving his family and his elderly parents to a mansion in the Hamptons. He also saw an opportunity for an investment. The market was at an all-time high, ignoring the impending risk of a major global catastrophe. In an emergency meeting, Ackman instructed his investing team to buy large swaths of low-cost financial products, known as credit default swaps, insurance against the market falling. Quote, we basically made $2.7 billion in 2 weeks from Twitter, and I wasn't even paying for my subscription, Ackman said. 2 years later, when Pershing Square Foundation invested $10 million in Elon Musk's bid to buy Twitter, Ackman joked it was a token to repay the billions he's made off Twitter. In the meantime, Ackman was hooked. Not only was the platform a powerful research tool, he said, it was in some ways a more potent form of communication than television and shareholder letters. He issued COVID warnings. He criticized Biden and U.S. foreign policy. He supported Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old who was acquitted after killing 2 protesters at a Black Lives Matter rally in 2020. Ackman said Robert F. Kennedy raised, quote, important issues about vaccines. He started to critique ESG. Privately, friends worried that the Twitterverse and its algorithmic boosting of right-leaning opinions that accelerated in the wake of Musk's 2022 acquisition was having a blinding effect. Ackman said it has opened up a world of possibility. Quote, it just sort of leads you to different people over time, Ackman says. There's a whole group of people who are kind of in deep on this stuff. By October 7th, when news broke that Hamas had attacked Israel, Ackman's followers were ready to listen. Ackman says he had never given much thought to diversity initiatives until this past fall, though he credits much of the success of his 8-person investment team, which is majority non-white, to diversity. He rejected a proposal for diversity training at his own company. The team currently has no black people and 1 woman. He recognized discrimination as a persistent problem, noting that his father was told as a recent graduate not to apply to Chase Bank because he wouldn't make much progress as a Jew. So when Claudine Gay was named Harvard's first black president over the summer, he was happy for someone other than a white man to lead the school. And Ackman was looking forward to new leadership for other reasons. Despite giving about $50 million to Harvard over the last 15 years, private tensions have ballooned between Ackman and the university. He says Harvard used the 2017 donation in a way that violated his specifications, something he did not speak about publicly at the time. In the days following Hamas's attack before Israel's invasion of Gaza, more than 24 campus groups circulated a letter charging the Israeli apartheid regime, as they called it, with being entirely responsible for all unfolding violence. The letter did not acknowledge the loss of life in the surprise attack that killed 1,200. Quote, what has Harvard become? Ackman asked himself, seething in disbelief. As protests erupted on campus, Ackman, whose wife is Israeli, joined a group of outraged donors from Silicon Valley and Wall Street to complain. Quote, I called my friends on the board and I'm like, I want to help, Ackman said. Quote, this thing is heading for a train wreck, I said. I'd love to sit down with Claudine. I'd love to sit down with the board. Let's work on this together. You know I care about the institution. Ackman was put in touch with board chair Penny Pritzker, a phone call he describes as one of the most disappointing conversations I've had in my life. Ackman said he told Pritzker that he had no choice but to share his concerns publicly. Quote, then I literally hung up the phone, sat down at my computer, and typed Harvard letter number 1. Pritzker declined to comment. The letter, a massive 3,138-word tweet he also sent to Harvard, was written in the style of his strident shareholder missives. He demanded that Harvard release the names of the students whose groups had signed the protest letter to block them from Wall Street jobs. Quote, one should not be able to hide behind a corporate shield when issuing statements supporting the actions of terrorists, he said. Internet sleuths heeded Ackman's call and published the students' names. One group blasted them on the side of doxing trucks that drove around campus. Ackman says he mostly opposes doxing, but that students should be accountable for their public statements. A few weeks after the attacks, Ackman flew to Boston, meeting with professors, a law school, and a business school class, and holding a listening session for more than 200 students. He says the students shared stories about anti-Semitic incidents that they'd experienced and described a lack of concern from the administration. Ackman left the meetings disheartened and perplexed. Quote, the problem was much worse than I thought, he said. So I called the people on the faculty who I knew would confide in me. And that's when I started learning about the whole DEI thing. Then I started doing a deeper dive. Ackman's deep dive involved a lot of learning from Twitter. He began to read posts by conservative activist Christopher Rufo. Rufo, a senior fellow at the right-leaning think tank, the Manhattan Institute, has led a high-profile charge against critical race theory, an academic concept that posits structural racism is built into American institutions. The idea underpins DEI programs and anti-racism seminars, which Rufo argues often label white people as oppressors, leading to reverse discrimination. Boosted by last year's Supreme Court ruling overturning affirmative action in college admissions, Rufo's arguments have spurred GOP leaders to ban teaching critical race theory in 9 states. Ackman read Rufo's book, America's Cultural Revolution, How the Radical Left Conquered Everything, and messaged with him online. His first Twitter post about DEI was a comment on a video clip of Amanda Seales, a black comedian, who argued it was wrong to present Hamas as this big bad wolf. Quote, is this incredible ignorance, conscious avoidance of the truth, or racism, Ackman posted. He noted that a large proportion of Hamas supporters are members of the black community and or other people of color. Some have argued, Ackman continued, this is spurred by a DEI movement that delineates the world into an oppressor-oppressed framework with Jews identified as white oppressors, an argument that parrots Rufo's book. Do you agree with this explanation, he asked his followers? 4 days later, Gay sparked outrage alongside two other university presidents, Liz Miguel of the University of Pennsylvania and Sally Kornbluth of MIT, during a widely criticized hearing on Capitol Hill. Asked whether calls for the genocide of Jews would violate the school's hate speech policy, Gay answered, "It depends on the context." Ackman went ballistic. Since October 7th, his Twitter feed has become a steady stream of Israeli hostage stories, videos of anti-Semitic incidents on campuses, and criticism of Harvard. The day of the hearing, he tweeted 23 times. Quote, "She has to go now," he said of Gay. The university president got the same treatment. Ackman had dealt so many corporate chiefs a relentless public crusade, only this time he marshaled a giant army on Twitter. A Wall Street man, he tracked his bets as if watching a stock ticker. One down, he said, when news of McGill's impending resignation broke on December 7th. Quote, "I give this a 95% probability," he posted 8 minutes later. Odds makers are now at 99%, he wrote the following day. Then he was on to MIT. To the MIT governing boards, he wrote on December 10th, "Let's make a deal. If you promptly terminate President Kornbluth, I promise I won't write you a letter." On December 10th, Rufo messaged Ackman about an investigation he was about to publish involving plagiarism allegations he had unearthed about Gay. Sibarium, a Yale graduate, wrote that Gay had, quote, "paraphrased or quoted about 20 authors without proper attribution." And Rufo had interviewed a scholar, Carol Swain, who accused Gay of plagiarizing her work. Ackman reposted Rufo, Sibarium, and other conservative activists throughout December, sometimes 6 a day. By then, Ackman's own posts were being boosted by a business leader with the biggest megaphone on the platform, Elon Musk. Hashtag defund Harvard, wrote Musk, who had more than 140 times Ackman's following in one of several replies to the businessman's posts. On January 2nd, Gay resigned from Harvard. Quote, "It was distressing to have doubt cast on my commitments to confronting hate and to upholding scholarly rigor," she wrote in her resignation letter, noting she'd been subjected to threats fueled by racial animus. Ackman posted his own more than 5,000-word letter that day too, so long it hit the character limit for paying users. In it, he reiterated a claim that he had insider information that the Harvard Presidential Search Committee had purposefully excluded candidates who didn't come from a marginalized group. Quote, "The more I learned, the more concerned I became, and the more ignorant I realized I had been about DEI, a powerful movement that has not only pervaded Harvard, but the educational system at large." Some of Ackman's friends and former classmates have mixed feelings about his Harvard crusade. They worry his use of Twitter has caused him to fall in with a group acting in bad faith. The seemingly self-satisfied, strident persona he displays on Twitter doesn't reflect the loyal friend who can laugh at himself and will consider different views, they say. But others praise what they argue is a political conversion. Quote, "He's a guy who's gone through something of an intellectual transformation. I don't know if he quite recognizes it in himself," said Ramaswamy. "The thing about him is he's very receptive to the best arguments, even if it's very different from what he used to believe, and that's a good thing." Ackman, alongside Musk, recently debated investor Cuban, who chastised the men for pushing away diverse talent. But Ackman later spoke privately to Cuban and concluded there is more common ground than difference between them. Quote, "Like me, he believes in diversity with a lowercase d," Ackman said, noting he's opposed to DEI as a political movement. Cuban said the conversation was very respectful, but that Twitter's echo chamber was far more intoxicating for someone like Bill than being on CNBC. Stanford's bank says the complaints over DEI reflect growing pains as American institutions try to become more equal. DEI consulting is a relatively new industry whose efficacy is largely unproven. When conservatives come to Stanford and complain, quote, "If we're being honest, we'd say, it's even worse than you think," Banks adds. But he and other DEI experts say critics like Rufo and Ackman don't represent the entirety of the industry. Quote, "There is good DEI and bad DEI, but what these people are doing is saying, let's scrap the whole thing, and that's clearly overcorrection," Banks said. Quote, "It's a false claim that DEI is about flipping the power structure," said DEI consultant Lily Zhang, noting the reverse racism is a carbon copy of arguments against affirmative action from the 1970s. But Ackman isn't stopping. For everyone who's called him a racist, he says, there are more people who have thanked him privately, though he isn't sure what his think tank will do. He says it will hire the very best people, Wall Street analysts, journalists, academics, to go deep on problems, quote, "where people have been taken advantage of, including vaccine safety, and, quote, why DEI is not working. Once they understand the reason for the problems, they will propose solutions, such as a new company or political campaign." Quote, "Is there a policy fix? Is shining a spotlight on it going to fix it?" he asks, and smiles half serious. Quote, "Or is this something Bill can handle with a tweet or two?" Let me know what you think of all this. in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.